Welcome to Rooted and Unwavering, a podcast and radio show which features leaders from all walks of life in conversations about courageous connectedness. How do we stay connected to our best selves, especially when we are challenged? What becomes possible when we truly stay committed to our own and others' greatness, also when we don't feel it? Join host Hylke Faber, transformational coach, facilitator, and award-winning author of Taming Your Crocodiles, and his guests as they explore leadership greatness in today's episode of Rooted and Unwavering.
Welcome to Rooted and Unwavering, a podcast broadcasting live, this time entirely from Phoenix, Arizona, where we help leaders connect more deeply to their innate potential. I'm your host, Hylke Faber, and today I'm delighted to be here with my friend and former client, Jennifer Byrne. Jennifer, how are you today?
I'm good, Hylke. I'm very excited for this conversation.
Me too. I always love our conversations. The last one was in a coffee shop in Phoenix, where we both discovered that we both moved from Seattle at some point in the last few years, and it was a delight to see you again in person. Jennifer is currently the Chief Product and Technology Officer for LifeHire, and I'll say a lot more about you in a moment, Jennifer. But before I do that, I always like to start this podcast with a brief reflection on what is Rooted and Unwavering for? Like, what are these conversations for? And they were born during the pandemic, actually, where I started asking myself, like, so what is this life for? What am I here to do? And I worked with teams and leaders for many years, decades. And I found like this sense of being connected to what's true in ourselves and each other was the guiding principle. So I wanted to share stories from leaders from all walks of life about what it means to be truly connected to what's truly important to us, especially when things are challenging, because I find that being rooted often is an art of letting go of those things that get us out of balance, often having to do with judgment and expectations and other kinds of gobbledygook self-talk that takes place somewhere in our skull or elsewhere in our body with emotional after effects. And so it's like that rootedness. One teacher once told me, like, this whole path is about really standing in your own 2 feet, like really standing your own 2 feet with deep compassion, deep wisdom. So that's what these conversations are for. So Jennifer, I'm so happy you're here today. Jennifer, as I said, is currently serving as Chief Product and Technology Officer for LifeHire, which is a company that is focused on enabling the flow of the world's talent, including working with customers, including in the Fortune 500. That's a role that you took, Jennifer, when your company was acquired. Your company was called Arrived, and this company is where you were the CEO. Jennifer's been mostly in technology. That's also where we met, actually, at Microsoft. Jennifer was the Chief Technology Officer there for Microsoft US, and originally joined the company in 2014 as Chief Security Officer in the public sector business, which is where Jennifer and I met when we were doing some work with that group on culture. You've held several positions at the executive level at Intel, McAfee, Symantec, and has journeyed throughout the startup world. And that's only a snippet of Jennifer, because she writes that in her formative years, she was spending time in the nonprofit world, serving the needs of vulnerable adults, where you learned about the value of bringing empathy and curiosity to every interaction. I think that's so beautiful. Bringing empathy and curiosity to every interaction. I think that's a beautiful principle to stay more grounded. And my sense of Jennifer is a person that is so kind, has a sense of balance that she shares very generously, is curious about the world and very adventurous in a way, which is also demonstrated with where she lives currently, in a little north of me in nature, amidst, I think, in cowboy country, if I'm understanding correctly. But that's maybe for another conversation. So Jennifer, welcome. So glad you're here. We're going to have a conversation about connectedness. Maybe let's dive in with this first question. What have you learned about connectedness in your life and leadership?
Well, I think the first lessons are about what it's not, or the feeling of missing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So connectedness is, well, I mean, if you're lucky enough to have always had it in your life, and there are people who are, then you maybe have a different experience of it. If you had the experience of loneliness, or feeling other or outside of whatever is the group or imagined scenario that you'd like to be in, then that's really the beginning of the lesson of what it is. So, uh, we all have different experiences that we bring into our work lives. And I had my own experience, sort of from childhood on, that I obviously, like we all do, carried into, the professional life that I built. But part of that informed my sense of what is an authentic connection.
Mm-hmm.
I'm being very wary of connections that weren't authentic. So, I started my career in tech in the early 2000s, and that was really when I was making my way into my first management roles. And I made a transition from engineering into sales, and in big companies, which are, as they are, it's like a high school on steroids, where you're trying to get to know people and build your network and make your friends and figure out how everything works. And so it can be tough if you come from a place of, a default state of a little bit lonely. And it happened to be at the time when companies were getting wise to the idea that you couldn't just say culture, you couldn't just say leadership or management, you actually had to invest in that. And so, and it's gotten very good. And you were life-changing for me. And I know for many of people, I reached out to a few people before this podcast, and they all said, "Oh my God, Hylke." So there are great companies that do that. But in the beginning, everyone was finding their way. And there was a lot of, I would call it manufactured connectedness in some of the early training that I was going, and I'm 30 and didn't know, I didn't have my footing. And so I think I learned a lot about connectedness by experiencing some manufactured connectedness, or feeling lonely through the efforts to connect.
Yes.
And you discern eventually, or I discerned eventually, what I really for myself thought connectedness was and meant to me. And that is it's a pretty emotionally charged thing. So you take from what you decide for yourself that you need in the midst of everyone else around you. And then that becomes a very sort of centered grounding place that you can be in when you're trying to connect with others. So I think that was really a journey of what it's not to what it should be, and then practicing for myself what I think it is.
I love that. A journey of what it's not to actually learning what it is. So since we're in the beginning of the conversation, maybe let's start a little bit about what you've learned about what it's not. You talked about manufactured connectedness. Like, what did you learn about connectedness, connecting to yourself, what's true about you, and really connecting with others in your early life? Like, what did you learn, and what did you have to unlearn?
Well, in my early life, I had an interesting childhood. So I was in my parents were in a quasi-religious organization. Some people might use the word cult. It's a little bit of an overused word with a lot of connotations, but many of those characteristics where you're expected to feel and think and be a certain way. And I never felt a part of that. So, I just had an alternative lifestyle. So trying to be in the mainstream, especially for a kid who was pretty ambitious and bright and wanted a lot for myself. But I had this, personal life of being in a very odd environment with people who expected me to show up in a certain way. That kind of cult behavior is a little if you're in it, you're in it. But if you're not in it, it can be very lonely experience. And so I think I had to learn from a pretty early age and it was a survival thing, to figure out what I believed, what felt right to me. And that's such a gift later. People, I don't tell that story very often because people have a reaction of, oh my God, that's terrible. Really, it was an amazing opportunity at the age of 15, 16, 17 to have to really stand up for myself, hands on hips. I'm not going to take this. I don't know who I am, but I know when I'm not. And that was the beginning of it. So I think I've always had a little bit of that chutzpah of being able to know myself, and find balance in other situations.
Hands on the hips.
Yeah.
That really resonates with me. I'm feeling that right now as we're sitting here, hands on the hips, and being able to stand on, basically find what's true for me. And I also really resonate with this idea of, I knew that wasn't me. And I can only imagine for a child of 15, 16 to get to that place, being surrounded by what is not her, and then not really knowing what is her. So tell us a little bit about how you discovered about what is true for Jennifer. How did you discover that? Because you saw what was not that, but how did you get to what was true about you?
I mean, that's a long journey. I mean, you're now talking about the journey I've been on since that time. So it's a pretty long discovery process. I think when you realize that the process never ends is when you can finally just settle into it. There's one of my favorite quotes. It's Thomas Merton, and I have it on my desk. It's like, I finally realized that my greatest ambition in life is to be who I already am, which is the process of just saying, everything inside you, you're already complete. And so it's just this really wonderful journey, if you choose to see it that way, of discovering who you are for yourself. And so, for me, it started in maybe some, like what it's not, negative terms, if you will. And it's been a process of filling it in. But I mean, no lie. Like, it's, who knows what I you look back with yourself, on yourself with some kindness, because if you think back to when you were 22 and who you thought you were, 32 and who you thought you were, it's like watching a movie, like, oh, yeah, that's what I thought I was. Interesting. A lot of forgiveness there, but it's just been a process of figuring out, connecting with your emotions. I think life is its own greatest teacher, because you can reflect on your reaction to the events as they unfold, the adventure. Like this podcast, we have no idea where it's going to go. You just like, I'm just going to figure out who I am in this moment, how I react, and I'll reflect on that later. And that will be more clues to who I really am. And it's just the process of it.
I hear a lot about kindness, kind eyes, reflecting back on who we were at 20, 30, 40. And that's behind, for me at least. And looking at it with kind eyes, nothing wrong with it. It's just all part of this discovery process. And our greatest ambition is to become who we already are. Great grounding principle. I might want to put that on my desk as well. That's a great grounding principle. And so as you started to realize that what you already are is enough, right? How did that inform your work life? That sort of realization, which wasn't probably from Sunday through Monday to Tuesday, Wednesday, this, oh, poof, I got it. But how did that inform your work life, that realization?
Well, it's interesting because you can know that about yourself, and but still to act within that frame, to make decisions about what you'll do next, what job, what company, it still feels like a leap of faith, because you're always jumping into the unknown. So, one of the reflections that I when you get to the other end of your career, you get to look back. It's such a gift, right? To look back and learn all these things, right? It's your own history that you can harvest a lot of insights from. And one insight that I love to talk about is that we always think about our careers. If you think about your career as a forward-looking path, you're talking to somebody who maybe is early in their own career and they're trying to plot their course, if you will. I think there's this expectation that it's supposed to be logical and sequential, and every step builds on the last. And so there's like this plan that you're supposed to be able to follow. But looking back, it doesn't always look like that. And actually, when, you talk to people, and I am my own best example, I'm not doing anything that is at all related to the plan I thought I might be executing upon at various stages in my life. So, I think there's something there about just being able to say, I don't know what I'll need in 5 years. I have a sense for what I need right now. And if I'm true to what I need right now, and I let myself have that, then, the next moment will take care of itself. Like, I'll get there when I get there. So that helped me be able to take jobs or, positions or projects that I felt were good for me at that moment, and not have to make a lifetime commitment to them, but just to think, well, what do I need right now? And oftentimes it's very practical, right? When we're talking about this on a somewhat esoteric level, because we always all live on that level too, but down in kind of the practical nuts and bolts of a career, should I take a job that's outside of what I do? Gosh, is that going to, you could have the thought of that's going to catapult me in a very different direction. That's not what I thought I want. That's not part of my plan. Or you could say, I need to be in a different team. I need something different right now. I need to learn a thing I'm so curious about, or I need to not be doing the thing I am. And so I just need something different. It's just what I need right now, And so give yourself permission, learning how to give myself permission to do that, so that I could maintain a sense of understand, kind of a broad understanding of why I'm doing what I'm doing, which is the connectedness to self, I think is what I ended up learning. And then you look back and you're like, wow, what a wild ride that was. And it all makes sense. Like, I can tell it as a story and people go, oh, that's really great. But, of course it wasn't planned out. It was just responding to the things I needed, in whatever place I was in.
That's very illuminating, because it breaks the mold of almost what we're taught in school. Like, it's linear. And a lot of the self-help and things like that, Think and Grow Rich, things like that basically talk about, you set your intention, your purpose, and you go for it. You practice it for Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours, and you get to mastery, and there it is. And we're not saying that's wrong.
Right.
What you're proposing here is that the way you are connecting to self and to working with life is by asking yourself in every moment, what is it that I need right now? Let that inform the choice that I make and what I do. And as I listen to you, Jennifer, I find that very liberating, because I know that I have a very linear mind that always, and then when I get into the linear mind, I get disappointed. Like, oh, I should be doing this, but if I don't do that, like, my husband always says, I have a flair for the dramatic. It's like these big moves, but it's just today. Let's do what it is today. Let's do what it is today. I have this especially when I lead workshops. Like this week, I was with a group of 100 people, and I love working with groups. I just love it. And then invariably on the plane ride home, I almost feel a little sad because I want to still be with that group, and I want to do it again tomorrow or Monday, and it may be a couple of weeks before it happens again, right? And your principle here is like, look at what you need right now. Doesn't get attached to some kind of linear accumulation of your, achievements or peak experiences, which is nice, but doesn't seem to be the way that you are perceiving it. So very helpful. So Tell us about a little bit more about this unlearning, because I'm still very curious about this. There's this little girl
Mm.
in the, let's not call it a cult, but something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And just tell us what that felt like inside of you,
Mm.
and how you worked with that, what that felt like. What did that feel like?
Well, there was a run up to the cult that you might need to. I don't know if I can tell the story without a little bit of a preamble to the story. So my mother was in the 70s very much into transcendental meditation, TM, which was kind of making its way back then. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi was the founder of it. He'd come over from India in that era and started teaching it, and it really kind of what we would now call viral adoption. So I was initiated into transcendental meditation when I was 7. There's a certain kind of meditation practice that they teach children, which is different than a seated closed-eye meditation that you learn as an adult. So as a child, you learn what they call walking meditation. So you have a mantra that you repeat to yourself as you remember. Because as you are aware that you are not repeating, you bring yourself back to it. So very centering meditation, but you do it eyes open and walking. Mm-hmm. That's actually been a really cool thing. I have a lot to say about meditation and groups and groupthink, and a lot of some baggage and some good lessons I've learned. But at the very core of it, this idea of learning at a very young age how to be aware and in the moment, and how to bring my attention back to a certain thing was really, really like cognitively and emotionally a helpful thing.
Yes.
And then to do it within nature, I think also just I also grew up in a very rural area. So when I went on a walk, it was through, like fields and trees. So very pretty. So, that was the start of it. And I think the cult was a slow build of, my parents getting progressively more sort of entrenched in this. And eventually my mother found herself in an offshoot of this that was led by somebody who was, sort of legitimately running a cult. And so for me, it was not a sudden, oh my God, overnight we moved to a little town in Texas and now I'm, I'm not who I was. It was really where a progression of something that in many ways had served me, over the years, served to isolate me from, as a kid, you're in junior high. That's when your peer group is really important. What you wear, who you are, how you show up is important. And so as that became more and more necessary for me to kind of fit in and figure out who I was, and my mother specifically was getting more off kilter. So it was that growing schism of feeling pulled in two directions. But I always had, because I had been practicing meditation, I always had an ability to just sit quietly because I learned it, right? Like we had to do it. Like we had to meditate like we had to do the dishes. It was the thing we had to do. So I learned to be able to be quiet and just figure out how I felt. So I think, and there's also just a personality thing too. I've just always had a little bit of swagger as a kid. So I've never been afraid of having my own opinion or having my own thoughts.
Yeah.
So, there's just a kind of a nice accumulation of, gifts that came to me along the way, and also kind of who I naturally was, that allowed me to, at some point say, this is ridiculous. Like I am living 2 lives. It's not okay that I'm driving to school and trying to act like a normal teenager. And I'm going home and my mom has been meditating for 4 hours and the house is a mess and, everything is falling apart around me because she's checked out of normal life. Like, no, this is actually not okay. Mm-hmm. And I can't do this double life thing. Like, it's not fair. And so I got mad. And then, I grew up in a really small town on an island, which is really isolating thing when you have to take a ferry boat to get off of it. But for me, I got a car, and that was a major sense of freedom. And I drove out of the cult one day. We went up there. It was in Canada on Vancouver Island, and I lived in a island in Washington, so we had to cross the border. I drove my little 1970 red Volkswagen Bug, to go obligatorily, sort of cult weekend, whatever. And I just knew it was wrong. Like, it built up in me, Hylke. I don't know how to say other than I couldn't tolerate it anymore. Like the physical, emotional, mental pain of having to be forced to live a life that was weird. And so I remember waking up at I planned to it wasn't an escape thing like you think in normal cults, but it was a statement. And I woke up at 3 a.m. and I remember standing out looking at the water and just saying, this is not what I want for myself. This is not what I want for myself. And I got into my little car and I drove away, never came back. So that was it. So there's the story I didn't know I was going to tell this morning, but there you have it.
This is not what I want. Grounded in this stillness. And it's interesting. My assumption is that in that stillness, it becomes very clear. It becomes more and more clear. It's like, hey, I am being pulled in different directions. And this is not only in that part of life you just described, but it's something that we may experience any day. Like, we're being pulled in different directions. And that's a telltale for us to stop and ask ourselves, is this what I want? Is this what I want? So tell us how that sense of swagger, I love that you said that, that sense of swagger grounded in centeredness, like doing the dishes, how has that informed you in very senior leadership positions? You're now the Chief Product and Technology Officer for LifeHire. You were CEO for a company before that. You've always had these kind of chief positions for a while. So how has that informed you, how you lead?
I think once I figured out that the privilege of leadership is that you don't actually know how to do a lot of the things that are in your span of control. And therefore, the only thing you really can do effectively and are called upon to do is to lead. And leadership is fundamentally a human function. It's not operations, it's not budgets, it's not, really the core of it. It's people, and making sure everybody who, you have in your domain is themselves connected and understands why they're there. And that's the thing you need to learn how to do. And I think you learn a little bit trial and error. Mm-hmm. But when I came to Microsoft and I had that chief security officer job, it was quite different from any role I'd ever had. I'd been in security, I had some basic qualifications for the job, but it was a new position. And so I think no one, Microsoft didn't know really what they needed. So they're also like, well, I think it's this loose. So you walk into a job and I immediately am like, oh God, I don't know what I'm doing here. I had a global team. At the time we were trying to convince governments that they should adopt public cloud. It was that era, which meant you had to go talk to governments about public cloud, not US government, everyone else. So it was you were just by, virtue of the job, always in a domain where you knew nothing, and working with people, who had immense amounts of qualifications and specialties that I did not have. So, that Christmas Carol, Little Drummer Boy, I always think about this, where it's that, Jesus is born and there's a little boy and he wants to go, give something, right, to, Jesus, baby Jesus, and he has nothing. So he just goes and he plays his little drum. And I felt like a little drummer boy a lot in those early years. I don't know what I'm going to bring to this scenario. But then you find out, so you talk to people, like, what do you need? And it just is very obvious, like when you felt your own loneliness so deeply and reflected on it so much, you recognize it in other people. And then, it's when you're in emotional pain and a loneliness pain and trying to go to work and be functional, it's hard to do. It's like going to work with a temperature or a kidney stone, it's hard.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of the experience of people. They were showing up and being functional, but maybe themselves not connected. And so I just realized, I think early on, that's the only thing I have is this ability to understand. And that's not the only thing I maybe overemphasized. There were a few other skills I did have, but like that was the biggest difference maker, is, the ability to create a team full of people where everyone was listened to. I think the greatest gift you can give anyone in life is the gift of being seen and heard. So if I could give everyone the gift of being seen and heard in one-on-ones and small group meetings, and, sort of figure out how to make that happen, how to encourage connection between other people, then you actually do have a really amazing team of people who, will fight and they'll charge the hill and do all the things that business needs them to do, because, they've felt seen and heard, and they are themselves connected. So, yeah. So I think that's how it is. It's so funny to me too. I think like in my job now, I like to be self-deprecating, because I think it's helpful as a leader to kind of make sure you're being humble and not thinking of yourself as better or bigger than anyone else. And so I do often say, honestly, I'm a project manager, guys. That's okay. That's what I'm doing. You write the code and I'll project manage it, and it's just a way of connecting to people. And it's what I have to offer.
Leadership with humility and with asking, like, what is it that you need? What is it that you need? And I can't help but making the connection, thinking that is maybe the question that little girl, Jennifer, wanted that people ask her, as opposed to being spoon-fed or basically force-fed what you're supposed to need. And what is it that you really, really need? What a powerful question. We're going to take a break in a moment and after the break, we'll explore this question of, like, how do we actually unearth what people really need? Because my sense is it takes a little while for people to actually even figure out what that is, and have the swagger to drive away with the little Beetle Volkswagen, or just tell you, like, this is what I need, and be unapologetic about it. How do we cultivate that as leaders? We are speaking with Jennifer Byrne, who is currently the Chief Product and Technology Officer for LifeHire. And I'm so enjoying this conversation. See you after the break.
You are listening to Rooted and Unwavering, presented by Growth Leaders Network, the leadership, team, and culture development company. If you would like to learn more about working on connectedness for yourself, your team, or organization, please contact Growth Leaders Network on LinkedIn. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Rooted and Unwavering with Jennifer Byrne and Hylke Faber. We are talking about what it means to be connected, and some of the things I already heard before the break have really spoken to me. This sense of not being on this linear path towards, I'm going to go here, but asking ourselves, what do I need in this moment? What do I need in this moment? And honoring that and making choices based upon that. And then you talked just now, Jennifer, about also leading from that place by asking people, what is it that you need? So how do you help people to actually tell you what they need?
A lot of people don't know what they need. It's actually my standard question in all of my one-on-ones forever, and in this company as well. What do you need? How can I help you? What do you need? How can I help you? And it's interesting how, there's just a wide spectrum of responses, and learning how to decipher them is helpful, because some people know what they need, and they don't know whatever they need. They don't need it from you, which is great, right? You find those people lovely. You have on the other side of the spectrum people who have no idea what they need and have just not spent the time. And it's not, I say that carefully, right? It's not, you aren't lesser for that. But you may never have been in an environment where that was even an acceptable question or a reasonable question, or just any, a question. So, you have to meet people where they are. And so when people don't know what they need, it's okay. I think planting a question, like, we're such powerful minds, right? And your subconscious mind is doing most of the work most of the time. So I've had the experience that if you just ask the question in a non-urgent way, that over time people will probably it plants somewhere, and you'll have a person over time start to discover that it's okay to have a need, that it's okay to articulate that and reflect on it and think about it. And so it eventually leads to different conversations. And, and I know, Hylke, you know exactly what I'm talking about because you teach this, but it is an amazing high when somebody has the epiphany of, oh my God, you know what I actually need is this. It's a level of awareness. And, it's a privilege, right, to be able to watch that unfold. But yeah, you just have to, I think, make it a practice.
Yeah, you said so much there. Let it unfold. Also honor that it's not just happening here in the front of the mind, but also in our subconscious, and giving that space to breathe. And I hear what you're saying almost, Jennifer, like a leader creates a container in which people get to explore or feel more free to explore what they need. And then they can discover. And that helps, that also creates the reflection that's needed to actually get to those insight, as opposed to, what do you need? Tell me now. So that unfolding, I resonate with that. I can't help but just wanted to ask you this question now. So Jennifer, what is it that you need now as a human being and as a leader? What's coming up for you today?
Well, I'm in an interesting place in my own career, which mirrors what I see around me a lot. I think there are times when you are on a path and, you do have practical goals or, internal goals that will take time to achieve. There are points in your career you might be at a thing for a certain period of time, and then you arrive at the next juncture, and then you are a little bit of a crossroads. And I feel like that is generally the pattern that many of us follow, myself for sure. And so I would say to you that I am at that bit of a juncture. I'm working for a live hire, and I will continue to be here for as long as the company needs me, but also thinking I'm on the back half of my career, the back nine, if you will. And it's an interesting place. It's like in the beginning of your career, you have all these possibilities, right? And that's hard. And then you kind of settle into a track or whatever. And, maybe you're highly opportunistic. Maybe it floats around, maybe it doesn't. But, it's that time in one's life where you are really prioritizing very practical needs, if you will. And then you get to the other end of your career where you don't have to do that anymore. You have the benefit of everything you've learned, a level of wisdom, understanding, and if you're lucky, a little bit more freedom to be able to do a lot of different things. And then it becomes overwhelming again. And I think that's where I am. And so, what I need is just these things that we've been talking about. I don't need to have a practical thing. I don't need to have a lot of sort of external accomplishments anymore, but I do need to feel that I matter. I do need to feel that I'm, ending the day having had an impact on a person, maybe more than one person. That's the most deeply fulfilling thing I do in my job. It's not making sure we're going to hit a budget number or deliver a product in time. It's knowing I had an impact on the team, on the people on my team. So I want that still. And I'm also pretty concerned about legacy at this point. I want to make the world better, have a positive impact there. I think it's just, it's getting to the other side of things. So I don't know what that means in more detail. It could take a lot of forms, but those are the requirements for me going forward. Also space, like I have learned the value of taking space for myself. Not everybody has that privilege or throughout their life, but I do now, and I love it. So, whatever it is, I have to have my first hour in the morning. You know what I mean? Like I have some requirements for for my next thing.
To me, this conversation is really about being skillfully at the crossroads.
Nice. Yeah.
You know, I see you from that 15, 16-year-old, and you skillfully weaving, you know, of course, with ups and downs, all these different crossroads and junctures, and asking yourself, what do I need? So what would you say to a person that finds themselves maybe just before crossroads, but feels that something's up? Like, you know, that place in life where you're like, yeah, I think I might be, I was on this track, but I feel like, ooh, I something in me is pulling me. There's something in me pulling. What would you say to a person like that? How do you navigate? How do you be with that time in that process?
And I just, we had a little internet glitch and I missed about 10 seconds. I'm so sorry of the beginning. I heard the end of the question, but not the preamble.
Great. So then I get to say that again. So this podcast being about, like, this conversation very much being about being at the crossroads, right? And what would you say to a person that is maybe in a track right now, but feels that the crossroads is close, that sort of uncomfortable space, or I don't know, for me, uncomfortable space is like, ooh, something, I'm getting to a junction. Oh, I'm getting to a junction. How do we be and navigate with that part of the process of the journey?
Yeah, this is hard. And I actually think this is where a lot of people are. So this is, I think, a conversation many of us are having with ourselves or friends or colleagues or whomever. There's a couple things that I think are actually practical. And, one of them is simply to address the notions of fear and risk. Because, if you talk about getting your own way, I think rooted and unwavering, as you have said many times, to me and to your audience, a lot of it is just being rooted is to be able to push away all of the things or pull back on your ego enough to be in the moment and to be clear. And I think, so addressing fear and risk is important. I like the idea of risk, understanding truly what that means, because that's how we make practical decisions. Like we do, at the end of the day, we also have, rent and mortgage and bills to pay. And there is that part of life, right? And so being at a crossroads can be on one level about your purpose and all of that, but many times is also primarily about a paycheck, right? And job security and health insurance and all those things. And so, when you overlay risk onto that conversation, the idea risk of something new always seems to outweigh any other version of risk. And that's where, in my experience, in my own life and in talking to others, where that conversation goes. It's the classic, I have a job opportunity, I want to go do something different, but it seems so risky. And I think that's fair and true. Also, what is the risk of staying where you are? And that's a more balanced view of it. So I think when you're at the crossroads, being able to understand that risk really is just the articulation of the fundamental uncertainty of life. That's all that it really is.
Yes.
And so we always swim in it regardless.
Yes.
And it's not usually more, and when you're talking about future risk, because we don't know the future, it's hard to manage it. So just trying to neutralize that feeling. I don't think you can make it go away, but you can maybe neutralize it, take it down a couple degrees. And then, also just getting very clear on what you're afraid of. I think we think fear is bad. That's just kind of it's maybe the unintended message of a lot of the conversation around fear, which is a popular topic, especially in the business world. And I feel like that's kind of part of it, but also a little bit of a near miss. Fear is also, a reflection of the fundamental uncertainty of life. Like it always exists. And I think it's super helpful to dive into your own fears, not as foreign entities, that are unwanted entities, rather just a part of yourself, and have a lot of lessons. They offer up, your fear offers up a lot of lessons. Why do you feel a certain way? And I think getting there is the state of readiness. And obviously there's practical things to do around getting closer to the juncture, but this is about controlling your emotional state and trying to remain clear as you consider what might be in front of you. Controlling
your emotional state and intending to be clear. It's intention for clarity. I often find for myself that I make the quote unquote wrong decisions when I move from not clear. I can only move from clear. Move from clear or don't move at all. And it doesn't mean I know where I'm going to go next, but at least I'm grounded in this clarity, and then usually the moment will tell me which way to go. Now, my sense, as you talked about this, is that you've had several experiences of being at these crossroads in these last decades as you made these choices. You've had multiple roles in your life already. So can you share with us a little bit about maybe how you applied this yourself, that this working with your fear and risk, neutralizing, getting to a place of clarity, and then making a decision to do what's next?
Well, I'm talking from the best version of myself right now. I think if I really go back into those moments, they're probably way messier than I might be making them sound. But
well, let's talk about one. Let's talk about. I'd love to hear, because that would be a really interesting thing to know, because I think we can recognize that in ourselves when we hear you talk about that.
Yeah, part of it is, like, if I think about a move, like there was the move from Intel to a startup, Stoneball, a security startup. There was a move from that company into Microsoft, and within Microsoft, a couple of position moves. So there was actually a pretty quick clip of every 2 to 3 years. I mean, many of those years within the same company. And, some of it's opportunistic. I think I have been able to understand the fear risk thing. I've always, it goes back to the swagger comment of, well, there could be something great out there. I think I can do it. I have always had a little bit of that as my default state. But it's also been kind of knowing, sort of clear on the higher level objectives, less so than, I want this kind of job, more so I want a job that feels like this. I remember when I went from sales, Symantec, I was a director of sales, and I just woke up one day and thought, this has got to be the end. This isn't working for me. What do I need? And, I thought through that and thought, I just actually really love tech. That was when I realized, you can either, there's kind of 2 general career tracks. You can either, have a profession and practice that profession, but at different industries, or you could love an industry and then wander around that and do different things. And this is down at the practical level of job choices. But I decided I wanted to just be in cybersecurity and tech, but learn a lot of different things. And so from Symantec, I just kind of had that, what's the other thing? What's the other thing? And found a job in business development and, so there's that. But it came from a place of, I don't like what I'm doing. What do I not like about what I'm doing? And I don't want any more of, and what would make me feel better? And at the time I was like, I just wanted to be creative. I didn't want to wait for a product to be packaged and, skewed up and all the marketing around it. And then I just had a talk track that I had to stick to in order to deliver it to market. I really wanted to be a few steps further back in that process of really ideating, what does the world need, or I've got this capability, but how do I tune it so that it can be relevant to the market? And so that was more creative, but it came not because I wanted to be a business development person, it's because I wanted to be more creative and have a little bit more, control over my domain. I think in Microsoft, it was very much the same, where I wanted to have a bigger stage, if you will. I wanted to have a bigger impact. I wanted to connect with people. I wanted to solve a problem that mattered. I wanted to be able to, have something of value, bring something of value to the company. I had a mentor at McAfee Intel who said, if you really want to continue on in this path of cybersecurity and stop working at companies where everyone has exactly the same skills. Go work at a company where you're a little unique. And at the time, Microsoft didn't have a lot of cybersecurity expertise. They had, underlying capabilities, but they were just at the beginning of their own journey of becoming a leader in that space. So fun time to join, but I joined and had a unique perspective that I was able to bring. And so that gave me, filled the need that I had at the time to sort of exercise my own agency, if you will, and be valuable. And so again, it was a broader requirement, not a specific job requirement. I think that's always been kind of the altitude for my decision making along the way. I think from CSO to CTO, that was Tony Towns-Whitley, who I know is one of our favorite people that we share. And I remember, interviewing for that job with her, coming out of that CSO role. And she forced me to think that way. Like, what do you really want out of the job? What do you bring? I didn't know the Microsoft portfolio. I wasn't a deep technologist in that space. I'd really only ever done cybersecurity, but she kind of forced me in that long interview period to think about what do I have to offer and what do I want? And I realized that kind of there's something very creative about being highly strategic. It's like writing a haiku poem. You have a bunch of constraints around what you can write and then ultimate creativity within it. And same thing, planning and execution in a corporate environment where you're highly constrained in many ways around what you've got to offer the market, how you need to offer it, what your outcomes need to be, the size of your teams, your resources, all of that, the regulatory environment that you're in, those are the constraints, but the job demands ultimate creativity within that. And that was the kind of the higher order bit that really fed my soul, with respect to what I wanted and what the world needed from me. Like the intersection of those two things was at that level, not at the details of understanding cloud computing to the nth degree. So that decision was made at that level, again, kind of a higher level.
What feeds my soul and what the world needs. It reminds me of a saying by Dr. Howard Thurman that we both know. Don't worry about what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and do that, because what the world needs is people who are alive. And to me, a lot of the conversation today, Jennifer, has been about that. What do I need? What feeds my aliveness? What feeds my soul? This question that Tony Towns-Whitley asked, what do you want? And what do you offer? Tell me about you, not the thing that you think I should know about you, meaning the thing that you want me to know that you think will comply with this image that I think that you should have. But what you want, right? That deep authenticity. So what would you say, and we're getting towards the closing minutes of this conversation, which flies by. It's funny how that goes. What would you say to a person who finds it challenging to connect with what they need, what they want? It might not be something that's natural for them, or may think there's no place for that where I'm at. What would you say?
I think if it's a person who doesn't know how to connect with themselves, I think the first thing is to practice giving yourself permission to connect with yourself, just in your own mind, in your own heart. Because a lot of times what that is a lot of voices that you've internalized that are not your own. They're telling you it's not okay. It's not my culture. It's not who I'm supposed to be. It's not who my parents taught me to be. It's definitely not something everyone will think I'm weird. If I go there, that's not how you do it. And I think practicing giving yourself permission to be a human, just in the privacy of your own mind, is probably the very first step to
Giving
connect with yourself.
the permission to practice being a human, the privacy of your own mind. Yes, I love that. Keep going. I interrupted. Sorry.
No, well, I think that's just a precursor to it all. The what ends up happening, we get negative feedback loops too. And so, the kind of the way bias works is that, you get one negative feedback around being too personal. And then you're like, I knew it. I told you this is not the right way to do it. But if you, I think more often than not, when you can connecting with yourself is a precursor to connecting with anyone else, because you have to connect with somebody else from yourself. So you have to be there first, and then you connect. And those moments are surprisingly human when they happen. So you can turn a negative feedback loop into a positive feedback loop, if that makes sense. So, and then once you've had, it's a little bit like an adrenaline rush when you feel like you actually created a connection. And obviously, like, this is business. These are all in business appropriate ways. They're small conversations, over indexing on it is probably not the right thing to do, but just knowing that when you kind of know how you feel, how do I feel right now? Who am I right now? What do I want this day to be like for me? How do I remember that I'm in this body and in this mind and in this moment? Then the connections become effortless, and they then you can walk away from a meeting or an interaction that was a connected meeting or a connected interaction. You had a cool conversation. You found out how somebody else really felt. You were able to connect with them. And those things, it's an adrenaline rush. It's a dopamine hit, if you will. So there's a lot of positive feedback that you can get. So it can be a virtuous cycle, this practice of giving yourself the permission to connect with yourself first as the foundation for creating a lot of beautiful and emotionally fulfilling connections with others. It's its own reward.
So how do I remember to connect with my body, mind, spirit moment, and then bring that, and then I am able to connect with others from that place? And it's interesting in the whole other topic, but what I mentioned anyway, we talked a lot about need today. And to me, being in that place makes us less needy and more clear about our needs without being driven by them or overwhelmed by them, because we already know what they are and we don't need somebody else to tell us what it has to be. It's an interesting paradox. Jennifer, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you today. I've had so many takeaways. I'm going to give you a moment to maybe say one last thing you want to say as we're leaving today. What I can say is I've learned so much today from you about what it means to be in the crossroads of this moment and to give ourselves the permission to be ourselves, to practice being human, and to listen to what's going on within us, our needs, our fears, the depth of our being, and then allow ourselves to show up from that place, which can be addictive, especially when we also connect with others and like that situation. So what would you like to say by way of closing today, Jennifer?
Well, I think you just said it all. I think this is the most important thing we can do for ourselves, is to know ourselves.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well, I will take that with me. And if you've been listening, that might be a practice to think about today. Like, what is it like to remember just a little bit more? It's not a static thing. Just a little bit more who I am in my body, in my mind, in my spirit, in this moment. What would happen if I brought that to this moment? Just as an experiment. So we've been listening to Rooted and Unwavering. Next week, the 32nd episode, we'll be talking to my friend and colleague, Rick Gage, who is a tremendously big-hearted leader and coach and facilitator. And I look forward to a conversation with him then. And that will be in a couple of weeks. And of course, you can always re-listen to these podcasts anywhere where you can find podcasts, where you listen to your podcasts on Spotify, Apple, etc. You can also find them on LinkedIn. And I'm sure Jennifer is okay if you connect with her on LinkedIn as well if you have more questions, and I would welcome the same. So you have been listening to Rooted and Unwavering, where we connect more deeply to our innate potential. See you next time. I'm your host, Hylke Faber. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us in today's episode of Rooted and Unwavering, leadership conversations about courageous connectedness, presented by the leadership development company, Growth Leaders Network. To learn more, subscribe to this podcast, connect with Growth Leaders Network and Hylke Faber on LinkedIn, or read Hylke's award-winning book, Taming Your Crocodiles. Now take a moment and appreciate something that is great about you. Celebrate the gift that you are and enjoy connecting more deeply to your best self today. See you next time on Rooted and Unwavering.